Hi everyone, I'm the plant propagator and welcome to my channel. Today what I wanted to do was give you kind of an introduction on how to grow these types of plants. Normally on my YouTube channel I am the plant propagator, so I talk about propagation of a large number of different plants with a focus and an emphasis on orchids. Today what I thought I would do is give more of an introductory discussion on how to grow Phalaenopsis for really the first time growers. So this is meant for people where you've gotten just your first Phalaenopsis orchid, probably from a big box store for, as a gift from somebody. And I wanted to share with you how to successfully grow these and have them grow for a few years or as long as you want. To tell you a little bit more about my background, so I have a PhD in plant physiology. I taught plant biotechnology at a major university in the US for 35 years. I retired and moved to Florida, and I worked previously on soybeans, but now I work mostly on orchids, and I'm mostly an orchid hybridizer, and I work on other aspects of orchid growth and development. I don't normally focus on Phalaenopsis, but I do have, as you can tell, I have a few of these in my collection. And I just wanted to share with you because I've had to learn over the years how to transition from soybean and tomato and other indoor flowering plants to orchids. And I grow them a little bit differently here from how I used to grow them in the Midwest. But what I want to talk about in a general sense is, what these plants are like and how to grow them successfully in different environments. So Phalaenopsis, these are Phalaenopsis orchids, otherwise known as moth orchids. In the orchid community, they're called phals for short, and it's a fairly large plant family in orchids. They're very commonly found in the big box stores because they're pretty easy to make and they flower pretty quickly for orchids. So in the orchid world, it usually takes a long time to grow the orchids from seed or from tissue culture here. So most of these Phalaenopsis orchids are cloned, and that's just how it works. They're grown when they're very small in laboratories in containers like this, and then they're brought out of the containers like this and into their potting mix, and they can bloom relatively quickly, which means in less than 2 years or 2.5 years at the most or something like this. And this is the reason that you see these everywhere, is because they're easy to grow. The conditions for growing them and getting them to flower fairly quickly has been optimized. They come in just a beautiful variety of different colors and sizes, and they're great plants. The flowers are also very long lasting. So the flowers on these plants will last for 2 to 3 months, and they're great for that reason. They're very showy, and the flowers last a long time. What a lot of people like to do is keep on growing them, and what I wanted to share with you is again how to do that. So these are orchids, and they're different from, that's the main thing, is they're different from the majority of plants. If you're not an orchid grower, they're different from the majority of plants that you've grown. They're not like tomato. They're not like one of the most popular flowering houseplants. They're not like African violets, but they are a very popular houseplant. And they can be maintained, and they can be induced to flower again if you grow them under the right conditions. All right, so the first thing is, when I say they're different, what does that mean? So these Phalaenopsis orchids, like many orchids, are what are called epiphytic orchids. They grow attached to the trunk or the limbs of trees, and they're just attached by the roots. So in nature, the seed lands in just the right place. The seed germinates, and instead of having these things, some orchids are terrestrial, they're ground growing, but these grow in trees. And this is an example of, right here, of Phalaenopsis orchids that I've grown from seed, and they're just grown on a slab of wood. And what happens with this is the roots, again, they grab on and they attach, and they'll grow like this. And again, this is how they grow in the wild. So when they're in nature, when they're grown in the wild, these are, by the way, are cultivated. These are very much improved from the wild ones. But when they grow in the wild, again, they attach to the trees. They get rained on a lot. And so people just think that they love a lot of water. They do, but when their roots are exposed like this. So I have these plants that are growing attached to the outside, that are growing attached to palm trees. And you can see how the roots grab on. Now what happens, it rains and the roots absorb the water, but then they dry out immediately. So it's a little bit of a different scenario. You don't see these plants growing in pots in nature, in the forest. They're grown attached to trees. So you have to know that, and you have to take that into consideration. So what I want to go over with you is, based on the background and what you know about, what I've taught you about these, I've got 6 points that I want to share with you on how to keep your orchid, your Phalaenopsis orchid, alive. Number 1 is do not overwater this plant. Again, in nature, the roots are just exposed, so they get a lot of water, but then they dry out very quickly. Most of these orchids, as you can see from the ones that I have on this table, are grown in pots. So they're in a potting mix. The potted mix is light and airy. So when you have to be careful when you water this, you don't want to overwater them. Number 1, do not overwater. Even though this is a tropical plant, you can overwater it very easily. And what you have to do is think, okay, these are more like cacti in the sense of the water. So they like water, but they're succulent. You can even feel the leaves on these plants. They're thick. They're succulent plants. The best way to kill this plant is with too much love, otherwise known as water. You water these things too much, you'll rot the roots in the pot and you'll kill the plant. So you water these things, they conserve moisture. So you water these plants once a week. Let the mix, the medium that the orchid is growing in, dry out. One of the other things that you'll hear about and you'll see about is people that water their orchids with ice. And this is okay, and the main idea behind the ice, the just add ice orchids and watering with ice, is that you put a few ice cubes directly on the surface of the medium, and that ice melts and it slowly waters the orchid. But you only do this once a week, and you only do this with a limited number of ice cubes, depending on the size of the orchid and the size of the pot. Now, you're thinking, okay, it's a tropical plant. Why should I add ice to it? Well, there's studies that have been done. Actually, the university that I used to work at, studies were done there that showed that as the ice melts, it does lower the temperature of the roots just a little bit, but not enough to cause the orchid any damage. But the idea behind the ice is its limited amount of water. And that's the number one thing is, do not overwater these plants. All right. The other thing, number 2, let's move on to number 2. The number 2 thing is, even though it's a plant and it's green, in nature it grows on the branches and the trunk of trees, and these trees create shade. So these orchids specifically, these orchids do not like too much sun. So they like bright indirect light, curtain filtered light, or just indirect light of some kind. So it's a good idea not to grow these in sun certainly in the summertime. If you put them outside in the summertime where you're located, do not put them in the sun. Put them in the shade of a tree. If you put them in sun, you'll cook them. You'll scorch the leaves. So these are shade loving. So you can put them in a window in the winter time, maybe when the sun isn't as intense. But you know, in the summertime, don't put these outside in the sun. If you put your plants outside in the summertime, put them in the shade. You can hang them in the shade of a tree, but shady locations. So bright light, really avoid direct sun with these orchids. All right, so that's the number 2 point, is not too much bright light, but not too much sun. Okay, number 3, how do you get these things to flower, and what do you do with the flowers? Well, you'll get this, and the flowers, like I said, last a long time. Some people, and these are flower spikes right here. These things, all these are flower spikes. After they're done blooming, you can, if you like, once they turn brown, cut them off. Sometimes they'll rebloom from the old flower spike, but those usually aren't very pretty. They're not real showy. You'll have secondary spikes that will come out of your primary spikes right here, and it'll just look, it won't look that nice. You'll have periodic blooms coming out on largely naked spikes, and it doesn't look nice. So after they're done, and after they turn, you know, brown, yellow or brown, you can trim them off. That's okay. How do you get them to flower? Well, these plants flower. They're induced to flower, usually one time a year, with a under short days, a short photoperiod. So which means in the spring or in the winter, really, is when they're induced to bloom in the winter. But it's the short day lengths in combination with a little bit lower temperature that you tend to have in your house or on a cooler windowsill. So it's a little bit of a lower temperature plus the short days that you get in the winter that will induce these to flower next. So that's how you get these things to flower. And again, they flower. You got to be patient. Orchids generally tend to be slow growing, so you got to be patient. And they'll bloom usually one time a year. Sometimes if you'll get repeat blooms off of an old bloom spike, and it'll be sporadic, but sometimes you can get them to bloom continuously on old bloom spikes. All right, fertilizing these plants. Well, if you use ice, you don't fertilize these plants. All right, so it's a good idea to fertilize these plants, and just use any standard fertilizer. In the orchid world, they say weekly. So you use a WEAK, weekly, a low concentration of fertilizer, and you apply it weekly, WEEKLY. But what you can do, what you got to watch out for if you're fertilizing, so a lower concentration of fertilizer, read the label and just maybe 25% of that, a quarter of it, and then just you can do that weekly. But what you have to do with these orchids is be careful that you don't get buildup of salts from the fertilizer. So it's a good idea to flush. So number 4 is, again, fertilizer is okay, but watch for buildup and flush the pots here. All right, so when you do this, you prevent fertilizer uptake, fertilizer accumulation, which will then cause the plants to burn. All right, repotting. And after a year or two, these things are slow growing, but after a year or two, they may outgrow their pot, and it's okay to repot them. These plants have not been repotted in about 3 years, I don't think. So they can stay in their pot for a long time. What you have to watch out for is your potting mix decomposing. So the potting mix, what you put these in, and what you get them in and what you transfer them in, it's not regular soil. This is not African violet. These are not tomatoes. You do not use soil for growing these plants and for repotting these plants. The roots need to be kind of airy. They need to be exposed a little bit. And with the soil, it'll stay wet for too long and it doesn't let the roots aerate. So what you have to do, what I use is I've got a couple of different potting mixes that I use. I use chunks of trees, so you can use bark. I also, over here, it's interesting, I use, this is you can hear it, this is lava stone that I use here. So this, but you can buy in most of the big box stores, you can buy orchid potting mix, and that's probably a good thing to use is orchid potting mix. And it contains big chunks of things, and it's a good airy mix. So when it's time to repot, number 5, when it's time to repot, you know, it's okay to repot every few years, but you use a little bit of a bigger pot. You can cut off all the old dead mushy roots. If you've got roots growing out on the top, let them grow out. That's how they grow naturally. But a good airy mix is really good for these orchids. They're very tolerant. Like I said, the majority of mine I have growing on trees in my yard. But here's a fun thing. Here is an orchid, a Phalaenopsis orchid that I grew from seed. So this was a seed about 2.5 years ago. I'm excited. It's got its first flower spike. I'm curious to see what the flowers look like. But this is growing just in a conch shell. There's no medium in here. It's just attached to the shell. But I had this outside. It gets a lot of moisture, and it's doing well. But it's interesting. And you can these orchids can be they can be grown in a variety of different conditions. You can put them in really interesting combinations of potting mixes and containers and things like that. They're very, once you know the basics that I'm explaining to you, they're very tolerant, and they will grow well under a variety of different conditions. Again, on a piece of wood, in a conch shell, in pots with big pieces of bark and rock even. So they're very easy to grow under a number of conditions if you follow these basic rules, which is, don't overwater, not too much sun, fertilizer is okay, and repotting, make sure you use the right medium. Okay, the last point that I want to make today, number 6, is learn how to grow these plants. It's a first step being here. I appreciate that you're watching this video and my channel. Learn how to grow these plants. This will open up a world for you if you're interested in plants and growing orchids. Some of these are easier to grow, some of them are more challenging. Orchids represent the second largest plant family, and there's such a diversity of different orchids that are out there. What I didn't mention is that these orchids mostly tend not to be fragrant. There are other orchids that are intensely fragrant with, raspberry, chocolate smell, honeysuckle, lemon, just a variety of different fragrances. So learn about different orchids. You can learn online as far as how to grow them and what the different orchids are, but also watch out for fakes. There are so many videos that show you, they're fakes, but they show you how you can use a rice extract, how you take banana peels and soak in water, and you'll get your dead orchid to rejuvenate and grow more flowers than you've ever seen. Coffee grounds, tea, milk, all this stuff, it's garbage. Learn how to grow these plants. Watch out for fakes. You can take, if you want a reliable source, you can visit the American Orchid Society website that has pages and pages of information on how to grow Phalaenopsis orchids, but all different types of orchids. If you want to take the next step, you can check your local orchid societies. Everyone has local orchid societies. In my area, we actually have 2 of them that are very close. You can check those societies. You can go to meetings all over the United States, even all over the world. There are different orchid societies. Go to the meetings. You can meet people that they'll invite you in, and they're happy to show you their orchids and give advice on how to grow them. So, again, the 6th thing is learn either online or going to various reliable sources, or just go to an Orchid Society meeting and learn about these wonderful group of plants. All right, I hope you enjoyed my video today. That's all I have. If you have specific questions about Phalaenopsis orchids, you can write those in the comments. I can either do a follow-up video or answer your comments directly, and we'll go from there. Okay, that's all I have for today. I hope you enjoyed my video. If you did and you want to keep on seeing them, it would help me out. if you can click on like, share, and subscribe to my channel if you're not already a subscriber. All right, that's all I have for you again today. I hope you enjoyed it, and happy propagating.